This episode of the OT podcast is supported by the Association of Optometrists, who want you to know that 1 in every 11 patients on an NHS waiting list in England is awaiting an ophthalmology appointment. That's over 600,000 people. Of those, more than 27,000 have been waiting for over a year. The AOP is calling on the government to take urgent action. We're facing a health emergency that is piling pressure on hospital eye departments, but community optometrists are trained and ready to help. We can step in to end this eye care crisis. With immediate action, we can cut wait times, improve outcomes for patients, and reduce preventable sight loss. The AOP's campaign, Sight Won't Wait, demands that the government acts now so that no one has to wait so long for an appointment that it risks preventable sight loss. Visit aop.org.uk/sightwon'twait to find out more and support the AOP's campaign.
Welcome to the OT podcast, which takes a deep dive into the topics affecting optometrists today. Each time we'll find a real expert in their field and attempt to pull everything we can out of their brain so it may reside in yours. This is the third episode in the series, and we're recording on the 6th of March 2023. You can listen to the other episodes with Nicola Logan and Ian Cameron on the OT website, on Apple or Spotify or wherever you usually get your podcasts. In our third episode, we'll be turning the spotlight on the patient experience by hearing from someone who is both a patient and a leader in the sector. My name's Kerry Smith-Janes. I'm the OT Clinical Multimedia Editor. I'm also an optometrist. I work in independent practice in Lancashire. And also with me today,
I'm Ian Beasley. I'm Head of Education for the AOP and Clinical Editor of Optometry Today. I'm also a visiting lecturer at Aston University and an optometrist. So Kerry, just ahead of this podcast, it gave me an opportunity to reflect on my time in practice and just think about the patient experience. And I kind of realised that as optometrists, you get that patient that's booked in at 9 o'clock in the morning and they may have a host of problems to deal with, and you manage those to the best of your ability, and then the patient leaves, and then your next patient is waiting, and you crack on through the day. And there's always a risk that we don't think about the impact upon what could be perhaps a fairly devastating diagnosis on that previous patient, and when they go back home, what that really means for the patient. And I think an example I can relate to is dry eye, which on the surface of it is a fairly trivial complaint, you might think. And we both would see several dry eye patients during a typical day, I'm sure. It wasn't until I had LASIK eye surgery and was slammed by dry eye that it really got me to think about that very next dry eye patient that came through my door and the impact upon that patient. And I think it changed the way I practiced, actually.
Yeah.
I don't know whether you've had any similar experiences in practice.
one thing springs to mind actually. There was a gentleman about my age came in, and he broke down in tears, and he'd had an eye test fairly recently, and he'd been told he had Fuchs endothelial dystrophy. And of course he'd gone home and Googled it, and he thought he was having a corneal graft, and he was going to lose his sight, and he was absolutely devastated. I spent most of the exam time just trying to calm him down and put some perspective on the condition he had, and it was really quite mild. And to be honest, I've never seen a Fuchs endothelial dystrophy that was so bad it went onto a graft. It does happen to people, but the moment patients go home, they'll Google what they've been told and of course draw their own conclusions about it. He went away feeling an awful lot happier, but we do have to be careful about how we say these things. I mean, every single day we tell somebody they've got cataracts, and maybe need to think a little bit more about that long-term impact and how they feel.
I think that's the perfect entry point to introduce our guest for today. So Keith, welcome to the OT podcast. Before we dive in and have a chat, I'll just do a more formal introduction if that's okay. Keith Valentine has 25 years experience in the sight loss charity sector and is the Chief Executive of Fight for Sight, which is soon to be merged with Vision Foundation UK. Keith has previously been Director of External Affairs at the RNIB, Chief Executive of Vision UK, and has been a trustee of Retina UK and Action for Blind People. And Keith's passion and drive comes not least from his personal experience of living with retinitis pigmentosa, causing him to lose his sight at the age of 36. So I'm delighted you've given up the time to join us this morning, Keith, and to share your experiences.
Oh, it's an absolute pleasure. And just in those trustee jobs, I a couple of years ago got to go on the board of the Turner Contemporary Gallery, which was, if you think about the visual problems and the experiences of patients, it was quite something to be able to get involved in an institution that principally is there to use visual art to shape the community and society. So everything is possible, even in this podcast.
I think your point about the Turner Contemporary Gallery is something that we'll perhaps revisit a bit later on in this discussion, Keith. But to begin with, would you mind just sharing an overview of your experience of losing your sight and how optometry featured in that journey? If you take us back to the beginning, really. I'm
a chapter in an intergenerational experience of sight loss that I think to some extent shapes me and my early experience. So I was diagnosed when I was 11 years old, and it was a pretty grim experience. It was in ophthalmology in a hospital in London. I won't say the name because they'd probably be embarrassed that the doctor said to my mother that she should have me sterilised when I came of age to stop the spread of the disease, which, for somebody whose mother, grandmother, great-grandmother, and according to Moorfields, back to 1850, before they lose track of us, have been going blind. That you think about it in those terms. The fact I now have, two kids, both with firsts at university, one of whom has the condition, has got night blindness, and had a driving licence taken off her. That pivotal moment in time, the fact that it's still at the forefront of my mind now, just shows how critical those moments of diagnosis are. And a bit of the story I never really tell about that is how I actually ended up in the ophthalmologist appointment in the first place, because we had actually, as a family, been going to an optometrist at the bottom of Walthamstow Market, to give it a bit of colour. So that's in northeast London, near the longest street market in Europe. Our family had been going there for years. So if you think it's a group of people within which there was retinitis pigmentosa and a routine experience of often quite severe sight loss, but with a relationship with a local optometrist where they didn't, they knew there was something up for us, and there were all sorts of processes of diagnosis and within the family about understanding what was going on with sight loss. But that optometrist knew our family in terms of our general eye health as well. So you mentioned, cataracts and sort of glaucoma testing, et cetera, et cetera. That optometrist to our family was an essential part of us maintaining our general eye health. So it's just not that we have an eye condition, that's the one thing, and then off we go and we live with the consequences and there's no treatments. It's also that, we've all of us, myself included, developed cataracts at different points in time. I was a detached retina. There are other factors at play. And what I would say, for me, there's something fundamental about placing a value on sight, which may sound unusual for somebody that's, got very little sight left now and, it will progress, as I go through the next few years to lose light sensitivity and whatever else. But actually, the way I look at it now, and I think the way this has developed over my experience of sight loss, is to place a value on the health of my eyes and preserving in any which way I can from my behaviours and choices the health of my eye. And that, from the outset, and I think from family culture, was very much linked back to, his name was Raj, but I can't remember his second name anyway, the optometrist that looked after us as a family. And actually, we were going through, around the time I was diagnosed, there were things happening with other diagnoses in my family. My grandmother's alive at the time, and my mother were experiencing it. All of us have Charles Bonnet syndrome, which is something, an unusual effect in retinitis pigmentosa. So for those, Charles Bonnet syndrome is an effect of the loss of the macular field, which causes you to have vivid and at times quite grotesque hallucinations. The fact that we had someone connected to eye health in our community that knew our family was really, really big for us at the time, because I think the care we received, particularly from Moorfields, was extraordinary. There were moments of quite brutal insensitivity in those experiences, and to some extent that carries through to today. So my daughter, she wears glasses, and her relationship with her optometrist and eye health sounds like I'm really down on ophthalmologists here. I'm not doing an incredible job, but she gets a wider understanding of what's going on in the health of her eye than she may from those kind of quite pressurised short appointments in the hospital. So from my point of view, someone going blind, sight has an incredible value. The relationship to eye health professionals, I think, becomes more important, not necessarily, as I say, just for your primary condition.
Do you think we've made any progress since your diagnosis to your daughter's diagnosis? I mean, has her experience been any better than yours at all?
That's a very, very difficult thing for me to answer in a way that doesn't just purely build on personal experience. I think there are definitely advances overall in diagnostic processes and the relationship between community eye health professionals, GPs, and the system, and a sense of, the impact of sight loss broadly is there. I think with the existence of eye clinic liaison officers in hospitals looking after people post-diagnosis. So, broadly, yeah, I think it's progressing. Individually, our personal family experience, no. I think the wider care, but at the moment, the diagnosis, my mother had a horrific experience with it, as did my grandmother. I had that experience, which principally was an impact on my mother. I didn't know what the word meant at the time. And my daughter found out because they were reading the results of her scans out in a corridor where she was sat alongside other people. And she was just told they're sat in a corridor, during lockdown when her family couldn't be with her, and any father or parent that has to take the call of a child on a train on their own across London during a pandemic, sobbing their heart out because they're going to go blind. I don't know how I can, answer that question in a way, because I do think that there is definitely constructive process. I think there's a lot of work going on, particularly through some of the work that John Ashcroft's done at NHS England and, Rob Cooper in particular at RNOB, starting to look at, no diagnosis without support. So that principle of making sure the connection works is definite progress. I think there's definitely movement in the system. But I think to your point that you made in your introduction about, somebody being in your chair and being upset about the condition because they didn't maybe know enough about get the right information from the internet or, all of those sorts of things. I think that there are clearly still issues there. Part of it, I think, if I'm honest with you, is the pressure on the system because, the amount of time an ophthalmologist has to make a clinical judgment and pass that news on and then move on to another patient is horrifically quickly. And I think that's really to do with pressures on the system. I don't think anyone goes into optometry or ophthalmology to damage patients by telling them about their eye health. I think quite the opposite. But increasingly, I think I loop back to my early family experiences and I feel the same now that there's, particularly if you've got a condition that's going to run through your life and that, with RP short of, us getting to trials and there being treatments available is really a matter of monitoring progress. And it's really the big challenge with one of those conditions that is currently untreatable is to find the way to live independently and progress in your community, with your family, economically, socially, all these sorts of things. And I think there's something really important about when you get eye health conditions, not simply giving up on the relationship with optometry. I think it's really, really important. For me, I do. It's on my mind that every 3 years now, every now and again, or it used to be more frequent. I'll go in, they'll daylight. They'll say read the chart in the hospital, and I'm like, what chart? And then you get your eyes dilated, and you go through, and probably a couple of hours in there through various treatments, etc. And I struggle to understand why I can't just go to an optometrist and get my pressure tested, and you have a look. Just check there's not a detachment imminent or anything like that. That would be something just for the convenience of life and the cost to the world that would be, I think, a dramatic improvement. But it's not for someone like me to try and redesign the sort of like primary and secondary care system. But from a patient experience, it's just clear ophthalmologists, despite best efforts, really don't have the time to engage with patients. And I think probably some movement to periodic engagement with optometry to get that kind of relationship with eye health would be important.
And Keith, you said earlier that you still retain some vision at present. So what are things like for you on a day-to-day basis? What are those things that you can do, the challenges that you face, and frustrations on a day-to-day basis?
It's not all bad. I've got a guide dog now, Dottie, that's been transformational for me. But that's not really to do with my eyes. I would describe it best as having confused vision. It's like if you were to punch and shatter a mirror and then take loads of the pieces out and then sort of put Vaseline over most of the rest of it, that'd be the visual effect. It's the best that I can do in describing it. But I do have some. Unusually, I think for RP, I've got some of my peripheral field left, which means that Unfortunately for me, they're in the lower and outer parts of vision, so I've got some degree of navigable vision. I mean, people say to me all the time, "Well, you don't look blind." I mean, I don't know what that means really, but I always try and take it as a compliment, because over time you train your eyes to follow voices. You kind of think about how you're standing and positioning yourself to, aside from anything else, not to make people feel, uncomfortable or that they're in an unusual situation in talking to you because of your sight loss. But I think I'm born of a very solid East End family who had a very limited tolerance for people sitting around and feeling sorry for themselves. And despite the fact that some of the things that might happen to you in life with visual impairment give you every right to sit around for a bit and feel like it's a tough time. But, I do think that the experience of my sort of sight loss in my family is quite varied. I'm in the middle range of people. So some of us went blind in their late teens and some didn't go blind until their 60s, when you could expect other age-related conditions perhaps to develop. So I'm in kind of that mid-range where it's happening in the middle of my working life. And for me, really, the thing that's not comparable to previous generations is the technology is fundamentally different. I don't know what I'd do without, an iPad. And I'm still principally using Zoom and my peripheral vision to try and absorb information. And increasingly, that's really, really difficult. And I'm starting to use sound. I mean, I tried to dictate emails, but it doesn't understand my accent. I've got to improve the way I talk in order to get it right. So I don't know. It's kind of strange because I feel like, on the one hand, there's a good friend of mine, David Clark, who's just been appointed to the chief executive of the British Paralympian Association, and as I joked to him the other night, despite that, you're a top bloke. Now, he's been blind since birth, and we've had conversations over the years that talk about that difference between him having a stable state with his eyes. So everything he's done in life technically and in work has been through sound. So that's the norm. Whereas for me, I guess my norm is to work visually. And, the challenge, I would say the biggest challenge for me in this period of my life is to let go of using vision to absorb information and move to sound. And I'm trying really hard. And if he was here now, David Clark would tell you I've been trying for years. And it's not, I don't know, it's the nature of the work that I do really that, a lot of my work is about relationships and discussion of concepts and those sorts of things. So it's not a point in my career where I'm necessarily, other than getting through emails and whatever else, having to do more technical things, But it does present in the sense that I need, as a chief executive of a company, I need to have an in-depth overview of all of our finances, and they're presented on spreadsheets. And so I've got to figure out, at the moment, I'm just hanging on, able to do it and to understand the information. First time I worked with someone that was born blind and they could understand a spreadsheet by listening to it, I found that almost as if they'd done magic, But like a lot of these things, I think there's resilience isn't just about coping with something that happened and it stays the same for me and for many people with degenerative conditions. Resilience is about recognizing you must adapt for good now, so that change will be there all the time. You're likely to have deterioration. For me, light sensitivity is significant. The light conditions will impact the amount I'm able to, in work terms, absorb from information. And, you've also got, perception of those that might know you over time, that they can see you going blind. They'll notice intimately how that change happens. And that's actually, quite big. And I'll be honest, it's exhausting. It's in order to get to the basic level of performance at work, you have to do a heap of a lot more than if you could see. But what I would say is, I don't think sight loss is unique in that it's about the eyes, but there are plenty of conditions and situations where we're just as colleagues, as friends and family, we're having to overcome. And I don't want to mention the horrors of the last 2 or 3 years, but I think it tested all of us in so many different ways. And I don't view what I might do as a visually impaired person to cope and get on with it, and what the impact of that is on my tiredness, is something that sets me apart from all of the other things that people, in very many circumstances, have to deal with. I think there's something, the profound thing about people that are blind that are getting on with life is that their humanity is structured in a way they're able to do it, and that's no different from any other person. But yeah, I don't know that I'll ever come to terms with it, if I'm honest with you. For me, it's a battle to proceed and to get on with life and to get the most out of it. I'm a season ticket holder at the best of the North London football clubs. That's sadly not the most successful this season. And I love it. I'll be going up there tomorrow night to a game in the Champions League, and I'll stick the earpiece in, soak up the atmosphere, and listen to the game. It's not the same as watching it. You can't get around that. But you learn to live in different ways. I think that's, as I say, is true of so very many people. And I don't feel that there's anything exceptional, in what I'm doing. All I'm doing is trying to play the hand I was dealt in the best way that I know how.
When you said so many people, Fight for Sight highlighted there's 2 million people in the UK currently affected by sight loss, and this number's set to double by 2050. You've alluded to your own personal experience, but what is the state of the nation at the moment, and why are so many people with sight loss of working age not in work? What are the problems, and how do we provide that support?
The only way I can see to look at it is that it's structural, because it's so significant and protracted. And despite many efforts to try and address this, and I was following RNB, were doing some work with business forums the other day, and there's clearly thinking start to happen about the relationship with industry. And Vision Foundation, which is the charity that we're in the process of merging with at the moment, did a significant piece of work around the impact of unemployment on blind people, as well as the stats that are around it. So there's there are efforts in play to try and address it, but the figure doesn't move. It's still the case. The thing that really stuns me is that technology has come forward so far, and actually the means for blind and visually impaired people to do the vast majority of jobs is in place. So the question is then, why are they not in the workforce in that way? And I don't have a simple answer for that. And so I am the only visually impaired chief exec of a national sight loss charity, which is what it is in a way. But it's I think if you were to look at organisations working with LGBTQ plus groups, or for women's groups, or people from different ethnic backgrounds, you'd be stunned to look at leadership teams and boards and find very few women in a women's organisation, or otherwise. But it's simply the case that in sight loss, that the sight loss charity sector is significant underrepresentation, I would argue, of blind and visually impaired people, given their intimate connection with the cause. Now, it might just be they don't want to work there, which is another thing, whether it's a good place to work. And I'm enjoy it, but I might be the odd one out, But it to my mind, there is an issue of equity and equality at play. I think that it's kind of rare to find people that have a discriminatory, an active prejudice, discrimination against blind people because they're blind. I don't think we're in that territory necessarily. Could be corrected by the evidence, but I've not seen it or seen evidence to support that. But the term unconscious bias is something that I've been kind of getting my head around recently anyway, the way we operate. But I think it is simply the case that, from the employer's side, that it's easy to imagine what someone can't do and therefore write them off. Now, the extent that the impact of sight loss is also impacting people's motivation, sense of confidence, resilience, ability to motivate themselves towards work, to cope with that additional effort that it takes to, basically in the world we're all as information managers, you've got to be able to soak that up and make use of it. And, I think there's clearly something that's going on there. I felt it myself. I was fortunate that when my eyes went, I had a company and some assets to sell, and could actually take the time out of my working life to recover really and reset, and then get on with what I needed to do. But that's not available to everyone. I'm lucky in that I had family around me that had all gone blind and all worked. And one of them was a butcher, actually. So I'm not sure how many fingers he had left at the end of his career. But it's a really, really difficult thing. I profoundly believe that blind people are not just underrepresented in the general workforce, but that we should expect and aspire for there to be a far higher representation of blind people in the charity sector focused on sight loss. Because however much I get information from trusted sources about what's going on with sight loss, nothing has the clarity and authenticity of talking to somebody else that's gone through it and has lived experience. It's superpowers and supercharges the ability to sort of digest and understand the potential for progress and how we might work to improve the quality of people's lives, and in the case of Fight for Sight, to drive up investment in research and to reach for treatments. And I'm to be really, really honest, I am reaching for a narrative that isn't confrontational or challenging in a way that tries to say, well, if people are to blame for this or any of that. But the stats simply don't lie. It cannot be right in the charity sector dedicated to support blind and visually impaired people that they are significantly underrepresented in the workforce. Now, I don't. That doesn't mean necessarily I will just hire people because they're blind. I mean, I'm not saying that. I mean, fundamentally, if the problem is attracting skilled people that have lived experience in the mix, then that's fair enough. It just means you need to take a longer run at it, and to take the time to work out how you develop those things. And you can probably tell I'm quite passionate about this part of it. I feel a huge responsibility, certainly in the coming years, in this role to do things personally and professionally to contribute to the improvement of this environment and to make sure that opportunities are open to all and that we have diverse workforces. But for me in particular, that people from diverse backgrounds with lived experience are getting the breaks, getting the opportunities to develop their careers. And be really honest, the answer to why there aren't more blind people in leadership in the sight loss sector can't be an intern program. That's a 20-year plan, and I've seen plenty of 20-year plans in the last 20 years. And they haven't come to fruition,
And Keith, thinking about the role of Fight for Sight, can you just provide a snapshot of the organisation? How do you get your funding? How does that trickle down to where it needs to be, and what are the outputs of that funding?
So Fight for Sight is the biggest of the national charities that fund research into the treatment, prevention, cure of eye disease. We've been around for there's a debate about whether it's 35 or 37 years, so I'll say 30 plus, and that covers me. We just this last month distributed £2.5 million into a variety of different research areas. I mean, the most exciting of which I found in listening to all of them was the genetics research, which really does seem to be going to another level. I mean, the money comes from the generosity of the public. It's as simple as that. We have there's no other cunning route to secure the investment that we need. It comes literally from people's generosity, which is again, I think utterly inspirational for me. The kind of from people that run a marathon for us all the way through to people leaving us legacies or making regular donations. There's definitely a community of cause gathering around Fight for Sight, and in all honesty, that's been with us through the pandemic, and is now we're overperforming against market trends with our fundraising, and I think that's something that must give my team absolute and utter conviction to execute the distribution of that money into the science effectively, because we have the trust of the public with us. In terms of our distribution, we're part of the Association of Medical Research Charities, so we have a regulated approach to distribution. We have peer review bodies and a college of experts. We have some of the leading thinkers, researchers and ophthalmologists in the world involved in our selection process, and we're funding some really, really exciting science. So we've got the current number's about £9 million out at the moment in various areas of research. What I would say to that, though, in terms of scale, is it's not a matter of pride that we're the biggest. It's a matter of some frustration, because if you look at sectors like heart, dementia, cancer, stroke, etc., it's often the research charities that are the ones with scale and able to invest in the science in a way that really is sort of breaking new ground and taking research forward to treatments. And the total value of the charity sector investing in eye research annually is around £15 million if you put all of the group together. And it feels, given the 2 million impacted by sight loss, but then eye health being so critical to a country's economy and social inclusion, all these sorts of things, that it feels to me that's not at the right level, that really there should be a wider pact with government and with population to advance the science. And I would broaden that not just in ophthalmology. I think there's the potential for that relationship, particularly around data and AI and the scanning potential, so the eye scanning potential, retinal scanning potential that's there in the optometric network and various other things where I think there's a need, investment from the charity sector can do the things that it's not commercially viable to do for pharmaceutical companies and really kind of elevate and accelerate the progress of the science. So certainly in our forward-facing research strategy, we've got a far wider view of where that money can be spent in the framework of our regulated grant program. But it's an organisation that will always be a funder, and our merger with Vision Foundation, which is a social impact funder. So they, as I mentioned before, they fund projects around those critical impacting issues for blind and visually impaired people. This merger is really to start to create that grant funding force that you see absolutely paramount in other disability and disease areas. And it's an exciting step forward for us because it builds up the infrastructure of the charity. We'll have a chain of shops. We'll have a community of donors that are very much committed to people being able to live independently and to confront some of the areas of discrimination. And some of the research is quite stunning. One of the things we're working on together as our first project as we move into merger is to look at the higher levels of likelihood of domestic violence experienced by visually impaired people, which is, recommend everyone go to the Vision Foundation website and look at some of this research. It's utterly stunning. You're 12 times more likely to be a victim of domestic violence, but also, likely to often find the services just can't adapt to you. That there's no understanding of that differentiation in the way that the support sector works. So anyway, look, there's big and important stuff to do, and stuff that's kind of not to be just thrown around lightly, but the sort of critical importance in the way that it's that kind of sort of revelation is addressed. And my firm belief is that this partnership between Vision Foundation and Fight for Sight, which is framed as Safe Sight, Change Lives, will create a new force for funding innovation. And particularly because, Fight for Sight and similarly Vision Foundation aren't out there to build up their own infrastructure and have hundreds of people. And, our first priority is in our own sustainability. Our first priorities is the sustainability of the investment in innovation and progress. So, it's on us to keep our team small, to be efficient. And as I said there, honour the trust that the public give us to not just do the right thing because it feels right, but do the right thing because we can prove the impact of what we do with our investment.
Is the cost of living crisis impacting that? Do you have to sort of work ever harder to get people to still dig deep and fund? Or you say you're outperforming the sector in terms of your funding, but is it more of a battle, would you say? It's
been a tough period for that long that I don't know if it's perennially a tough period now. Certainly I think that the way that we are achieving that performance is by being utterly ruthless in making sure that our data quality is where it needs to be, that we know the people that give us money well and that we have a relationship with them and we keep communicating, and that we, I use the word community in a number of different settings, but the community around Fight for Sight and Vision Foundation is a very dedicated group of donors. So the critical thing for me is twofold: make sure we're efficient, communicating well, the consequence of what we're investing, of the investments that we've made with money. But also, I think impact is everything for us. So we exist for the impact. Our ask isn't for people to give us money to fund, big services or those sorts of things. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that, and the services are needed. So it's not a critique of that. But I think we've got a kind of different offer. Certainly on the Fight for Sight side, there's not really any. There are other research charities, that I would absolutely support and give to myself. Actually, I was involved in Retina UK for some time, and they're doing incredible work there. But there's something about the authenticity of the offer that for the kind of donor base that we are building up really appreciate, that they can see the money that they give us is being, through definite processes, is being put to a specific cause, and that's in the science, and increasingly with Vision Foundation that will be in funding innovation for the improvement of of lives. And I think it's that differentiation, without any critique or criticism of the other organisations. It's really, really great that we've got service organisations out there doing business. I've benefited from it myself. I have a guide dog, but I think it's I don't know, there's something in the mix. I think there's there's been a lot of technical work we've done to get there as well. We've got a very, very good team working on making sure that we've, the donors that we have got are well looked after, that we understand them as people and not just income figures, and that we, as I say, we communicate who we are and what we are very openly. And I think I'm part of doing that as well. I don't know how unusual it is for someone in a chief exec's position, but I'm often asked to talk about something I'm going through as a patient, which is what we're doing here today. I'm happy and pleased to do that. I feel it's part of the responsibility. But I think, what we get as an organisation from that, and very many colleagues that are able to communicate in the same way, is the truth of us. We've got nothing to hide. We're a very simple mechanism. We're asking for people to make contributions to something that will have a very, very clear effect, and we do that as efficiently as possible. And I think that's part of why we're able to be, overperforming in the context of the market. Can we improve? Yes, of course we can. There's always room for growth, and one of the reasons I'm here and the merger's happening is we want to do more. We want to build that force for research and investment and innovation in the sight loss sector in a way that's kind of absent. And it's a peculiar thing in a way, that the two critical questions that occur when you get a diagnosis of sight loss, and I'd argue this is for other conditions as well, but for sight loss, are: can you stop this happening? How do I live my life? Those they're intimately connected in the experience of diagnosis, or the diagnosis of your child, and how that prognosis then folds out, how you actually then go on to live your life, what your relationship to treatment is, if it's possible, what your understanding is of the development of new treatments and trials, and all these sorts of things. And yet that kind of can you stop this happening part of it is just nowhere near the comparable scale that you see in other disease areas. And that's where I am in terms of the science, and my team are at, is starting to conceive of, well, let's look at those other sectors and understand why that differential's there. It can't be the case in the modern environment, with the science progressing as it is, that we are simply saying there's nothing that can be done for you. In fact, perhaps it's a bit of a defeat if you kind of think that something might be done for you. Forget all that, get on with your life, we'll support you. Now, I think that's all fine, except for the forget about that bit. I think it's perfectly natural for me as a person with sight loss to be thinking, I'd like them at least to slow it down. I place a value on sight, and that's important to me. So I think we're a new voice. I genuinely think that there's something sadly new in us starting to talk about the interests of visually impaired people in research and treatment as powerfully, if you like, as the need to secure independence and equity. I don't feel any need to have to choose between the two. I think those, can you stop it happening? How do I live my life? Is intimate, is deep rooted, and is there for everyone that's experiencing sight loss. I got diagnosed with diabetes last year, and I literally was sat in the chair, and the guy said to me, "Well, this is what's going on for you." And I said, "Can you stop it happening? And how am I going to cope with this?" And I thought, "Oh my God, I'm my own focus group." I don't know if I just believe my own propaganda. That could be another worry.
You alluded to some genetic research that's going on at the moment. Could you tell us a bit more about what the scientists are working on at the moment, and any of the sort of advancements and successes so far?
Yeah, there are. It's such a wide field, and there's so much going on. I think that the bit that I'm particularly sort of exercised about at the moment is something called CRISPR gene editing, which is a mechanism by which you can forensically identify and edit genes to work for treatments for eye disease. But it also applies in wider fields. So what I would say, I will cautiously step away from saying anything that would give anyone false hope. What I would say is that the potential, picking on gene technology, there are other areas as well, picking on gene technology in particular, that there are advances coming in multiple disease fields and condition areas that are a result of a certain range of gene editing technologies. And I think that for me is where you, in that field alone, and there'll be other areas where you can see that you're in reach of processes, procedures, techniques, and technologies that will start to have multiple impacts in different areas. What's unpredictable is the areas that will be successful. And I think that particularly for Fight for Sight, we're very often investing in early stage research. We're in that space where commercial interests dare not tread. As a consequence of that, many of the things that we'll invest in will not necessarily come to fruition in real time in the next 2 or 3 years. But the general trend, talking to the sort of leading figures in ophthalmological research, recently Manchester, Oxford, UCL, etc. There is a sense that there is huge potential, that the impact of the COVID period, there I've said it, the impact of the last 2 or 3 years, has been difficult in the system, but the recovery from that is starting to really, really build. One of the things that's interesting from our point of view is starting to look away from, well, not look away, to continue investing at the same level in specific research areas, but then to look at some of the problems that might exist for the infrastructure as a whole, which isn't quite as sexy as me saying, oh, wow, we've got this injection that's going to do X, Y, and Z, or some other snake oil I might come up with, but thinking about how we get the best talent, best scientific and research talent to go in ophthalmology, given the investment levels at times are not where you want them to be in compared to other areas. And that's kind of twofold for us. One of that is making sure that actually a lot of our investment goes towards making sure the PhD students stick with ophthalmology and go into fellowships, and we build that kind of critical mass of talent behind ophthalmology. And then in parallel to that, we're increasingly investing alongside other charities in those areas of comorbidity. I mean, the obvious one to point to is diabetes and retinopathy, and what the relationship is between eyes and that condition. But it's also true of stroke, heart, and dementia and very other areas. So I'm not just expecting leaps forward in terms of specific techniques. I'm also thinking a lot at the moment about what role a charity like ours might play in building that workforce for the next 10 years that can guarantee, as far as anything can be guaranteed, progress. But it's tough. I'm not going to pretend that it's anything's going to drop out of the sky tomorrow, and it'd be wrong to give false hope. But I think there's room for informed optimism, if I can put it like that.
Keith, I wonder if we could perhaps close by circling back to one of your earlier points about your role as a trustee of the Turner Contemporary Gallery. Can you just Kerry and I were chatting about this earlier, and we're just both intrigued about what the experience is like of art for people with sight loss, and what you get from that experience.
Like everything with sight loss, it's kind of different and might look weird at first. I mean, I just to say that I'm as well as being visually impaired, I come from quite a difficult background in London, and I went to a difficult school, and the privilege of being there as well as the disadvantage of it was that there were teachers that were socially very, very committed. And I had an art teacher, Val Hill, who made the effort to take someone like me and my rather troublesome classmates to the Tate Gallery. Not somewhere I would ever have gone. That sort of visit wasn't in my family's heritage or culture particularly. It gave me a sense of another world that was possible. And regardless of the prospect of going blind or whatever else, there was, just something about other ways of living, if you like, than I could see immediately around me as I was growing up. And from that moment, art was intimately connected with my outlook on wider and elevated, not to sound pompous, experiences of life. And it's always been important to me. And I'm very lucky that I have a house at Broadstairs in Kent, which is out near the Turner Contemporary Gallery, which is, I think, quite famous in the not just in the cultural scene. I think I often say to people that I'm involved in it, and they they're quite. It's like, wow, really? It's quite a thing. So I don't, I didn't want to go on the board because I'm going blind, and there's some kind of kick about a blind guy being involved in visual arts, but I wanted to go there because I believe that art can be transformational for place, for geography, for people, and for progress. And certainly, it's been a pivotal part, not just in its presentation of international quality art, it's also been pivotal in its role in relationship to communities that I very, very much recognise from the experiences I had growing up. So there's something in the mix here, but it's unavoidable that it's kind of unusual for someone that can't see the work to to be part of that. And that's really me as a customer or a visitor, or I don't know, you're not a service user of an art gallery. I suppose it depends on the gallery. The business of running an organisation is the business of running an organisation. I'm getting a kick out of it from that point of view, because I really, really believe that gallery is going to be part of the transformation of an area that's economically deprived and has all the problems that go with it. But also, they're fantastic. If you visit the Turner Contemporary with disabilities, everybody's welcome. It's somewhere where the staff will wrap around to help you enjoy the experience, and there are descriptions, and actually I don't know if I'm privileged, because a couple of times I've been and the guys have taken me around an exhibition personally. So I'm not going to guarantee that can happen for everybody. I don't know if it's just there because I guess I get to vote on the finance committee what's going on. I don't know, but it's a bit like I was saying about football, and football and art, probably two extremes. But there's learning to live the world through sound, and fortunately, I'm also there's where it's at all possible, you can sometimes touch art objects, which is really good. But yeah, I mean, I think it is an unusual thing, but I think my commitment to the Turner Contemporary is as much to do as its role in the economic and social transformation of the area that it sits in, as it is to do with any statements about me as a visually impaired person. Well, I would say over the top of it is, my God, I miss the art. I miss the colour and just the experience of it all. It's tough, I'll be honest with you. And the art, the way I live my life in order not to let that be something that makes me take on water, is to be active and contributing. I if we can do anything at Turner Contemporary, for me, it would be to make sure that those young people in particular, perhaps that were like me or otherwise, that don't see themselves as having much hope or prospects, can connect to something that shows that there are many, many pathways, through life. And I don't think that being blind or otherwise changes that in relation to art for me, because I lived it myself. I wouldn't, honestly wouldn't have, I didn't know what university was when I was a kid. And I went to university first in my family. I think honestly that's to do with the commitment and belief that a teacher placed in me and the exposure to other opportunities. And what I'd say is that where if the sight loss had kicked in earlier, and that would have been another barrier to overcome for me. And this is why certainly what we're doing at Vision Foundation and Fight for Sight, you can see like treating eye disease and saving sight, slowing the loss of sight down, and making investments that create pathways for people to engage socially, culturally, in the community are utterly critical. But we also, we blind people are also citizens, and I think there's the involvement I have in Turner is as much about that for me. That for me is not about my sight loss. That for me is about what I want for the community that I'm part of, and it's about giving back. I am one of the luckiest people that I know. I really do feel privileged.
Keith, I think that's a perfect place to finish, and I just want to thank you for your time, and it's been fascinating hear you sort of walk us through your journey, and I will wish you all the best with the merger. Yeah, thank you. There's a few 60-hour weeks to go yet, but I think we'll get there.
Thank you, Keith.
This episode of the OT podcast is supported by the Association of Optometrists, who want you to know that 1 in every 11 patients on an NHS waiting list in England is awaiting an ophthalmology appointment. That's over 600,000 people. Of those, more than 27,000 have been waiting for over a year. The AOP is calling on the government to take urgent action. We're facing a health emergency that is piling pressure on hospital eye departments, but community optometrists are trained and ready to help. We can step in to end this eye care crisis. With immediate action, we can cut wait times, improve outcomes for patients, and reduce preventable sight loss. The AOP's campaign, Sight Won't Wait, demands that the government acts now so that no one has to wait so long for an appointment that it risks preventable sight loss. Visit aop.org.uk/sightwon'twait to find out more and support the AOP's campaign.